Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Meet the Articles Forum. This forum is brought to you by the Nantucket Civic League. Today, we'll be devoting all of our time to the short-term rental warrant articles. These four articles will be the first four articles on the agenda at the special town meeting at the high school on Tuesday, November 7, starting at 5 p.m. I'm Scott Wilson. I'm the Vice President of the Civic League. I'm also chair of the Nassau Homeowners Association, which is one of the Civic League's 25 local neighborhood associations on the island. Today's Meet the Articles Forum has a long tradition. It furthers one of the Civic League's core missions, encouraging participation in town government. Our specific aim today is to help Nantucket voters make informed choices at the November 7 town meeting. We sponsor this event without favor or prejudice, and the Nantucket Civic League is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation and is strictly nonpartisan. Today's program is being broadcast live to you, our Zoom participants, and also to an audience of NCTV viewers who are able to watch and listen today live on NCTV 8. Equally significant, we are simultaneously recording this forum as I speak, and the resulting YouTube video will be made publicly accessible to viewers on demand in the weeks ahead. We'll circulate that YouTube link widely when we get it. Before we begin, I have a special request for our audience of Zoom attendees. We encourage you to participate by asking questions. To do so, submit your typed in questions at any time, starting right now. Your questions will appear on our screen in the order of submission. Our plan is to read each question aloud in that order. Please submit them when you want. Bear in mind that when you submit them, we want to make sure you add your name. Here's how to post your question. First, look for the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Then just click on that Q&A button and type in your question. Again, remember to include your name. You may direct your question to one specific panelist or to all of them. Now, on to the short-term rental articles. You'll hear from 5 invited panelists today. They are Matt Fee, a member of the Nantucket Select Board in his 5th term. John Kitchener. John is a year-round resident, local voter, and alternate member of the Planning Board. He was a member of the Short-Term Rental Working Group and is a past member of the Monomoy Civics Association's Executive Board. Julia Lindner. Julia is the Executive Director for Act Now and is a former Short-Term Rental Working Group member. Her experience includes working for the town's finance department. Julia is a Nantucket resident. Andy Lowell. Andy is a solution-based carpenter and home maintenance expert. He's also a second-generation short-term rental owner on Nantucket. And finally, Peter Schaeffer. Peter has owned a home on Nantucket for 35 years, and he's been a full-time Nantucket resident for the past 5 years. Peter has served on the Finance Committee for 6 years. He was a member of the Short-Term Rental Working Group, and he's also a member of the Senior Center Our Island Home Work Group, the Solid Waste Committee, and is a former board member of the Property Owners of Town Members East. In forming our panel, we strove to select panelists who represent different viewpoints. We're seeking their own observations on the formation of the warrant articles and on the possible or potential long-term effects that could result. Their perspectives considered together will offer a balance of viewpoints of these what-if future possibilities. That's our specific focus today. As for the Nantucket Civic League, again, it is nonpartisan. We strive only to inform by providing the views of both proponents and opponents. We thank our panelists in advance for not making ad hominem remarks. Feel free to criticize arguments, but not your fellow panelists who are making them. We'll start with a detailed discussion of Article 2. We'll call upon each panelist in turn, and we'll call upon each panelist in turn and without interruption for 5 minutes to present their views on the ramifications of adopting the zoning article. After that, we'll do the same for Article 1 by way of leading into a discussion of the 2 main issues of the 2 competing versions of Article 1. First, the legacy provision, used to be known as the grandfathering provision, but we choose not to use that word. It's also sometimes called the pre-existing non-conforming protection clause or just the protection clause. And second, we will discuss the tying of the passage of Article 1 to the passage of Article 2. And finally, we'll discuss some procedural matters and some enforcement issues. We will rotate the order of responders with each question. I may or may not follow up with questions. After that, we'll turn our attention to questions submitted by the audience. And so with that in mind, I'll start with our first question. Article 1 is a general bylaw provision. It contains a number of new rules and regulations governing short-term rentals. Who can do it? How many times a year can they do it? Who can't do it? What licenses are required, and so on. Article 2, on the other hand, is a zoning article. It simply provides that short-term renting shall be a primary right attached to any home in any district on the island except in a commercial industrial district. Here's the question. What do you foresee as the long-term effect on Nantucket for Article 2 to pass? Or conversely, where would we be if it doesn't pass? We'll begin by going in reverse alphabetical order, starting with Peter Schaeffer. And again, you'll have up to 5 minutes. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. It's kind of funny that we're even discussing this because according to the town, it's already legal to rent, to have short-term rentals. So it's kind of like it's perplexing, why the issue ever came up and why we formed the short-term rental committee. However, the reason that we did it was, we think, to make it clearer, to clarify the regulations and the laws regarding short-term rentals, and to put some controls on them. So going forward, we didn't continue to have this rapid expansion. So number one, it's already legal. Number two, the history on Nantucket of renting homes goes back 80 or 90 years. And I don't know this for myself, but I was told that the reason that we don't have hotels outside of town is because of the fact that we can rent homes. And that has limited us to 900 hotel rooms that we have on Nantucket. And just as an aside, last weekend, we had 26 weddings on the island in the rain. And if we didn't have short-term rentals, those people would not be here. There would be no place for them to stay. So the history is that way. Our economy is very, very much based on tourism. And it's totally based on tourism. And without short-term rentals, it would be impossible to have the amount of people we need on the island to keep the island going. We also have a trust issue. People bought property years ago as an investment, knowing that they had the opportunity to rent it to help pay back their loans or whatever else they needed the money for. Some of them used it for short-term rentals for long-term planning for retirement. And regardless, they have a trust in the town, and we have the right to let them keep that and not take away the trust that they bought the property in good faith. And the last thing I think is we want to get rid of the lawsuits. There's 3 or 4 lawsuits right now, more to come if things don't get changed. And we think that by passing 2, we would basically tell the courts that the town is 100% behind it, which is it's already legal. Let's not forget that, but we're 100% behind it. And we believe that the judge would be very, very positive in terms of their decision. So I am in favor of passing 2 and continuing with short-term rentals as they already are legal. I'm done.
Thank you, Peter. Up next is Andy Lowell.
Thank you. I would have to disagree with some of that. I'd like to see where it's written that it's a legal activity. I agree with it has taken place for 80 or 90 years, maybe 100, maybe 150 years. My family's been involved in short-term renting since the early 50s. And the short-term renting that I'm seeing taking place of what we are used to seeing, there's no comparison between the two. I'm not seeing a lot of the disturbances being addressed. I'm seeing a lot of suggestions that if you have a problem, call the police. The hard data, quote unquote, on calling the police is not a good measurable use of disturbance. Not everybody likes to call the police, and there are a lot of disturbances that take place I mean, you're really going to call the police department about every time somebody gets in and out of their car, they toot their horn with the car alarm, or every time they drop some wine bottles into the garbage bin and slam the garbage bin lid to the sound of equivalent to a gunshot at midnight, am I going to call the cops? Hey, my neighbor just slammed their garbage bin lid. There's a level of respect that has been lost with today's STRs that somehow we need to pull back the reins on. And how do you get people to exert some respect for their neighbors? I live in a neighborhood that was once a community neighborhood, a mixture of plumbing shops, carpentry shops. Bill Fisher's tackle shop was 3 doors down. There was commercial activity throughout the residential neighborhood. I am simply here and speaking my mind from personal experiences in my neighborhood. And for me, it has been an incredible culture shock, a change that leaves you with an empty feeling. Coming home to a neighborhood where 8 out of 10 of your neighbors are a different neighbor every week. So I believe something clearly is missing from the planning process with this as far as vetting goes. I'll repeat that the comparison between local owned STRs and non-resident owned STRs, there's a very vast difference between the two. I'm not expecting the island to go back to the 70s, to the years of the Nobska and back to Woods Hole and no fast ferries and things like that. But there needs to be a balance of some sort to where the community spirit of a neighborhood is not drained. And it's gotten to the point in my neighborhood, and I will have to let me explain my neighborhood. It starts at Derrymore Delaney, Pilgrim Road, Westchester Street Extension, New Lane itself, where I live, move over to Hedgesbury Lane, Upper Vestal Street. Then we get on to Milk Street Extension, down to Hummock Pond Road, and even beyond. And this entire area has become inundated with short-term rentals that come at a high price. And somebody has to mention the elephant in the room, which is when you're paying between $25,000 and $50,000 a week for your short-term rental, a level of entitlement comes with that. And that level of entitlement includes a level of disrespect. The short-term—
Andy, you have 10 seconds left, please.
Okay.
10 seconds.
There's a huge difference between old style short-term rentals and today's short-term rentals. Thank you. Scott, you're
Julia?
muted. There you go.
Julie,
Thank you, Scott. I'll try to piggyback a little bit on the speakers before me, but I think from MacNow's perspective and from our supporters' perspective, to Peter's point, we're here with Article 42 because last year the planning board brought a similar article, Article 2 this year. It's exactly the same article, and it's an acknowledgement that our zoning does not address STRs. And that's why we've been trying to work so hard towards clarifying our zoning. We can't predict what the courts are going to decide. We can only decide as voters what we want to do. And the concern around Article 2 is the same concern that was there with Article 42 last year, which is it would amend zoning to allow any home anywhere on the island, including 98% of the island that is residentially zoned, to turn into a home that is no longer a home, that is a business, a short-term rental business that could be a full-time business. It could be primarily an STR business, but it's no longer a home. And once we remove that zoning protection, we understand zoning is one of our biggest tools. Once we remove that zoning protection, we have no defenses for, our neighborhoods. And I think, what you've been living in your neighborhood is something I've been hearing in other neighborhoods across the island. When someone says, where should I move on the island? I say, I don't know. The whole island is changing. And so I think no one is talking about removing STRs from Nantucket. We're just trying to find what you mentioned, Andy, which is a balance. But Article 2 goes way too far. And I think there was a really good conversation that Matt started, and hopefully you elaborate a little bit on this, Matt, about an accessory use zoning article, something that we've been sponsoring, we've been supporting for a couple of years. Zoning's complicated, and I think, you may have run out of time, but I think there's a lot there that should be explored. The argument that the economy depends on STRs, I think, is a bit of a false argument. We know we need somewhere for visitors to go. We have a tourism-based economy. We have a construction-based economy. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a year-round community to support the local economy, there is no economy. And so what the island is living and other people are living to a much greater degree in terms of trying to find housing, in terms of trying to run a business, than me personally, but I hear a lot of stories, and I think it's generalized across the board. We have a general acknowledgement that there's a huge issue around preserving the year-round community. That is what contributes to our local economy. And seasonal residents can contribute, but I have never seen numbers that show that the visitors that stay in STRs contribute tremendously to this local economy. The visitor numbers that were shown in the Donahue Institute included seasonal residents. So no one's shown us STR only numbers. And as far as the STR tax is concerned, we're worried about the tax that the town is collecting. We're not looking to eliminate STRs, but have you seen the amount of money we're spending on trying to help housing scratch the surface? The numbers are twice as high as what we're getting in STR tax. So no one's talking about eliminating STRs. We all want to find a solution, but Article 2 would make it harder for people to live and work on the island, and will continue the commercialization of the island. And I think that's something that people really want to stop or prevent. We don't have the final answer yet. This is a complicated topic, but it has to start by voting no on Article 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. John Kitchener.
Thank you, Scott. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our audience for taking the time out on the weekend to participate in this forum. It's important, so thank you so much for doing that. Most of my time is going to be talking about Article 2, but I do need to take 1 minute to set the stage with Article 1, because these two articles are designed to work together. So just briefly on Article 1. Article 1 bans any new corporate STRs. Today, we have no restrictions on corporate ownership. Article 1 limits new STRs to a maximum of 4 changes of occupancy in July and August. Today, there's unlimited turnovers, to some of the points Andrew was talking about. Article 1 disincentivizes homes being bought just to short-term rent a few months a year. What it does, it limits peak period occupancy changes to 4, and that makes these investments very much less attractive than they are today. And it limits individuals and LLCs to owning only one STR. Today, there are no limits on how many a person or an LLC can own. And then finally, Article 1, it does allow existing homeowners to rent 9 times in July and August, and to keep more than one STR if they already own them. These exemptions are fair, but they end when a home is sold and retained only if it is passed down to heirs. So that's just briefly Article 1, but you can't have a sensible discussion on Article 2 without understanding Article 1. So let me start with, I was on the work group. Our town council and planning consultants recommended very clearly the best legal way to regulate STRs is to link general bylaws with a primary zoning law. We challenged them on that several, I would say many times during that 8 to 10 months. They looked at all the other options. They always came back to primary use zoning as their recommended way forward. And I'll talk about a little more why. You know, we had a lot of work discussions about making STRs an accessory use instead of a primary use, as Julia just mentioned. But the question was always accessory to what? Our town council and planning consultants always concluded there is no practical way to define or enforce STRs as an accessory use. And Mr. Fee may have a different take on this, but even after the work group handed over their recommendations to the select board, as part of the select board review process, they, Mr. Fee, 2 former work group members and town council, looked at trying to figure out an accessory use option, tried very hard. In the end, it came down to primary use zoning linked to strong general bylaws is the best way forward. And I disagree with Julia. It wasn't that that small group ran out of time. It was because our planning consultant and town council were of one mind that there is just no way that accessory use can go forward. And everybody, I would say we really should listen to town council and our planning consultants. They are the subject matter experts. We may have opinions. They are the subject matter experts, and they know better than any of us what is legal and what is not. You know, I'd remind everybody at last town meeting, Article 60 failed to pass. It called for every home on Nantucket to prove it had been occupied for 6 months and 1 day in order to operate as an accessory use STR. It was voted down by a 60-40 majority. I think we know how people feel about that kind of accessory use option. You know, at a more personal level, many year-round residents rely financially on renting out a second home as an STR. It helps them cover the escalating costs of a primary home on the island, sending kids to college, saving for retirement, to do the things that make living on our very expensive island viable for everyone and not just the super wealthy.
John, your time expired.
Okay,
Sorry.
any accessory option would destroy that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Matt, you're up.
All right, great. Thank you. First off, I don't own a STR. I have dorms, and I have a home and some dorms that I put my employees in. I have some employees above my commercial business and a year-round rental behind my wife's business, Flock on Orange Street. So, you know, I'm looking at it from that perspective. The question of whether it's legal, I would say, it's at what level? It's legal at one level. It's probably not legal at another level. And that is the tightrope the town legal counsel is trying to walk in the litigation. I think I can't talk much more about that. But to say that I think, you know, the full we would be in trouble as a town if we allow a full commercialization. And I'm not looking at it from where we are today. I think where we are today is fine. You know, takes care of the weddings, it takes care of the economy. But where are we if it's, 10% more, 20% more, 50% more? How many homes on Fairgrounds and Rugged, et cetera, have disappeared, have become short-term rentals? How many how many changes have there been? Those are the things we should be thinking about. And if I were a short-term rental owner, I would want I wouldn't want to pass. I'd want some protection. I'd want to know that what I was doing was still going to be valuable. And I think that's kind of lost in this whole argument. The question of accessory use, it is true. I worked with Dave Iverson. I spoke with Dave and town council. It was the day before the final recommendations were due in, and we thought we had come up with an accessory use. We thought we had found a way to do it. And then he went back and talked to a couple other people. And then by the time we got to the next night, that was off the table. But I firmly believe that it's accessory to what? I think the short-term rental work group has come up with some genius ideas. I think the 4 instead of 9 was really good. I think the not allowing the change when it's sold, et cetera. They have a lot of really good stuff in one that we're going to talk about. And I think that they've defined what accessory is. And I think accessory is 4 times peak season, and what is accessory to? It's accessory to using it, you using it all the rest of the time. They've defined it. And so I think that from my perspective, that's closer to the historical use. That's more protective of the neighborhoods, more protective of a housing. I think that they hit the nail on the head there. And interestingly, I think if I got this right, that came up at the very end. So some of this stuff doesn't happen immediately. Some of the good decisions, good ideas, only come out after a lot of work on it. I think the accessory is one that we need to spend more time on. I don't support Article 2, and the reason I don't is it is a codification. It allows every single home on the island to be, everyone can be a small hotel. They could rent whenever they want, and not right away. I understand the regulations will stop it, but as soon as if the regulations pass as written, I hope they do. I hope the select board version passes. But as soon as it passes, there's going to be people who are going to be challenging it at town meeting, and there are going to be people who are going to be challenging it in court. And so we have to look ahead and say, okay, if people are going to be challenging it, what is our backstop? What is our protection zoning wise if they challenge it? And if we make short-term rentals a primary use subject to the regulation, and those regulations change, then we've opened the door and we've let them happen everywhere. I was very fortunate. Last thing I'll say, we'll have plenty of time. I was very fortunate to meet with Walter Barnaky, it was probably 20 years ago. And he was, he was getting older, and he said the mistake he made was allowing every single home, was setting it up so every home on Nantucket was able to be rented. And if he could do it again, as he did when he went to Newburyport, and he advised the Lagazi family who sold to Carp, when he did the Newburyport, he said, don't do what I did at Nantucket. Don't let every home become a hotel. Let's have neighborhoods, let's have homes, and then let's build hotels on the water. And so historically, we haven't had it the way we will have it if this passes and gets overturned. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Maureen Phillips, who we have some questions, and she's going to read those out. And I think the way we'll handle this is if anybody wants to just speak up and start answering the question, I think that's fine. We're not going to expect all of you to answer, but we want to give a chance if you want to answer it. So, Maureen.
Yes. So the first question we got is from Virginia Vidoni, and she quotes a letter to the editor stating that the STR work group was on a mission to legalize commercial STRs from the beginning. And she asked I think she's asking the STR work group, can you please clarify your intentions and goals from the beginning of your work on these articles? So I'm assuming that's going to people who were on the STR work group.
Okay, let me comment on that. I was on the work group. The work group was made up of 9 people, I think, originally. Out of that group, I think only 3 owned short-term rentals. The rest of us did not. We started with a group that there was 2 or 3 people, or 2 people or 3 people that were not in favor of, not proponents of what we ended up with. And then there was people like me. I don't, quite frankly, I didn't think we needed to have a meeting about it. I thought we would kind of just leave things the way they are because it's working. And the market will make its own corrections. But to say that we started out positive on what we ended up with is wrong. It really was a consensus of the group, and with lawyers' interactions and with experts' interactions and with visiting other towns and talking to town managers, we put a whole lot of stuff together, and that's how we came up with what we think was a really good proposal. So it really was, we did not have a goal at the beginning to end up where we did. It was really just the way it evolved.
Okay, sure.
Julia, go ahead.
Thank you. I was also on the work group, and I have a different perspective. I actually am the one who probably said it first in front of the select board that I felt from the beginning that we were being led towards this Article 2, what Article 42 was last year. And because we aren't lawyers, right, and because we were depending on the Judy Barrett and town council, they just pretty much told us how it was, that we needed full codification. And so whenever we tried to bring up accessory use, which is the obvious other answer, we were just shot down. And so I appreciate Peter's perspective, and that's his. It certainly was not a consensus on the work group. And I think when people, I think some people were led to believe that if the Article 1 would be enforceable and the regulations could stop what Article 2, the full codification, would do. And I think they may have gone along with it because of that. But the reality is we understand there's some major issues with the Article 1. So I don't think there was a thorough discussion at the work group level. And I don't think that we were advised comprehensively.
Thanks, Julie. John, you want your hands up?
Yeah, and well, just briefly, let me answer Victoria's question, which was about commercial SDRs. I think the question was, the editor stated the work group was on a mission to legalize commercial SDRs from the beginning. Can you please clarify your intentions and goals from the beginning? Yeah, Victoria, this was one area where there was incredible amount of consensus. We all, wanted and have addressed the issue of corporate STRs. But again, the legal situation is very clear. We cannot protect individuals on the island without also protecting corporate entities. So it's not what we would like to do. It's what we have to do legally. So I think where we ended up is good. There will be no more corporate STRs on the island, and hopefully the ones we've got will over time disappear. But I do want to go back also to Julia's point about there wasn't discussion about accessory uses on the work group. That is just not a fair assessment. We had a lot of discussion about accessory use, and no one, including Julia, was able to put on the table a clear, coherent, this is what an accessory use would look like. In 8 months of discussion, we never had that. And I agree with Peter that we gave this an awful lot of time and always came back to the same place. The primary use is the only legal way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Andy Lowell's got his hand up.
Thank you. For clarification, the proposed article limiting 4 changeovers during July and August, what keeps 3 or 4 families from contracting for a month, but they're each renting 1 week? How can that be? How can that be followed? How can that be tracked? I have to disagree with Matt. I mean, it's a great concept, Matt, but can it be enforced? Certainly 4 families can get together, contract a house for a month, and on paper, it looks like it's being rented for the whole month, but in reality, there'll be 4 changeovers in there. And I just, so if somebody can possibly answer that question, I'd certainly like that. As far as Mr. Schaeffer's comment of it's working just fine, certainly it may be working just fine in some areas, but I would certainly like to see a bit of empathy for those of us who feel that it's not working just fine. And I know my tenants that have been repeat tenants for many years. I'm down in the lower echelon at $2,500 a week for a very simple 1-bedroom cottage, but they're feeling like they're priced out of the island. And one by one, I'm losing them. And actually, I won't be renting short term again. I'll be changing my house over to a year-round rental, but simply because it's very sad that so many of the clients that I've dealt with for so many years are feeling priced out of the island, and to compare a house that was built just 3 years ago, 5-bedroom, fully finished house, all the amenities, only parking for 2 cars, approved by the planning board, yet it's a 5-bedroom house. They rent 3 vehicles while they're here, taking up space in the road, actually blocking the road. All the services block the roads. If there were ever an emergency at the end of the dead end road I live on, it's possible there would be an issue with emergency services getting there in a timely fashion, because normally through the course of the day, there are services blocking the road. And are basically unwilling to understand what they're doing and ignore any requests to please don't block the road. But yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Andy. Maureen, you want to move on to the next question?
Yes. So the next question is from Kathy Baird. And she mentions lawsuits claiming that STRs are illegal commercial businesses in residential areas and illegal in Nantucket zoning. And she asks if Article 2 does not pass. She has 2 questions if it doesn't pass. The first is, what do you believe will be the consequences to the town and the STR operators? Oh, I'm sorry, it's the same question. Apologize. And she thinks, yeah, sorry. So I didn't realize this question was completely repetitive somehow. Anyway, if Article 2 does not pass, what do you believe will be the consequences to the town and the STR operators?
Anybody want to take that?
Well, the one consequence will be lawsuits will continue to proliferate all throughout the island, and people will be continuing to rent, not knowing whether it's legal or not, other than the fact that the town says it's legal. And it's just going to continue to be lawsuits after lawsuits. And we're trying to get rid of that. And that was one of the major things we decided when we put the group together, was we needed to come up with an answer that would get rid of the lawsuits. And we think we came up with something that was fair to everybody. And that's what our goal was.
Thanks, Peter. Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't pass this go round, I think we show up at, town meeting. I don't think much changes. We show up at town meeting in the spring, and we bring a article that has accessory use as the way of doing it. That would be my suggestion. I don't think much would change if we took a little more time on this. And I think that a lot could change. I think we shouldn't be acting under fear of lawsuits and trying to solve this that solely from that, make everything legal everywhere and try to do it. Because if we do, we're going to end up with a bunch of other lawsuits. To think that the only lawsuits we're going to have are the couple that are going on now, we're going to have a bunch more. No matter how we act on this, there are going to be lawsuits. There's going to be people who are going to have their interests harmed, or they're going to perceive them as harmed, and they're going to, protect their interests, whether it's commercial interests trying to overturn that aspect, or whether it's people, not wanting to be held to 4, they want 9, they want what the other people have. We're going to get sued no matter what. So why don't we, my sense of it is, let's get sued, try and do something that's good for the most amount of people and good for the long-term interest of the island. If we take care of the island, I always say green is good. If we take care of the island, take care of it, they have it a nice place to be, have it nice neighborhoods, take care of the water and everything, it'll take care of us. And I think, getting a handle on this, very close to what the short-term rental group has proposed, would get us there. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Julia?
Yeah, I agree with a lot that Matt said, and mainly that, the average rental, the average STR costs $15,000 a week in the summertime these days, and that price has gone up 50% in the last 3 years. It continues to be and it's becoming, every year it's becoming a better investment proposition to STR home, regardless of the price, the reason that the prices keep going up. So if our answer is to allow them all everywhere, then I think the island has much more to lose than, let's wait and figure it out. I think most people understand, even though zoning's complicated, that once you change it, you can't undo it. So the accessory use, to Peter's point, no, you're right. Look, it's not an easy concept, but it's something that absolutely can be done. And I believe that Matt and, his efforts have really shown that. So no, it means that we turn around and we try again. And frankly, from my perspective, we've been trying for a few years, and, every year I think we're getting closer and closer to the right answer. But to say that we would remove the zoning protections and allow full-time STRs across the island because we don't want a couple lawsuits, I think that's pretty, that would be governing with fear, and that's hopefully not how voters feel. Thanks.
Thanks, Julia. John?
Thank you. I don't think it does mean if it's shut down, we turn around and try again, whoever the we are. I don't think it means that. I think it's a very simple decision that we're looking at here. If Article 2 does not pass, then a judge in Boston is going to make the decision for us. And I think for all of us, seasonal residents, year-round residents, voters, non-voters, the choice is very clear. Do we want a judge in Boston to make this decision on our future, or do we want to make it ourselves? Town meeting is the vehicle that gives us the opportunity to make that decision ourselves. And I really hope that we will do that on November the 7th. I think people are tired of turning around and coming back again. Thank you.
Scott,
Thanks,
may I answer, John?
Go ahead, quickly.
I agree with John. I've made that argument before, and we want to see something done. A lot of us want to see something done to move on to other big issues on the island, but it does not mean that we should give up the ship. And while we don't have the right answer, waiting 6 months isn't going to, for a long-term scenario that protects the island and the year-round community seems pretty darn important.
Thanks. Maureen, the next question.
Yes, the next question is again from Kathy Baird. What are the implications of expanding existing STR regulations, but not confirming their right to operate as a primary use?
I guess that's really asking what happens if Article 1 passes, but Article 2 doesn't.
I would say so, and there's other questions that other people are asking that basically that same question. What happens if Article 2 doesn't pass? What happens then?
I think I saw Matt's hand first.
Well, it depends which article, are you talking about the select board's version that was, we amended the recommendations, with over 3 meetings with the short-term rental work group and with town council. We made a couple changes, and it's the first 7 pages of the warrant. If that is what is voted upon, if that is voted positively, then we can vote Article 2 down. If the town meeting embraces and votes for the FinCom version, planning board version, then they have linked those two. So if we vote positively for one and vote negatively for 2, or vice versa, neither of them are in force. So I think there's 2 answers of what could happen based on which version of Article 1 will eventually pass at town meeting.
Julia?
Thank you. I think the short answer is, and I agree with Matt, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's basically what happened last year when Article 42, the zoning article, same as Article 2, didn't get voted on last year, but people were ready to vote it down, essentially. And Article 39, the licensing program, which is Article 1 that we're looking at now, these regulations, is just an expansion of that licensing program. So Article 39 passed. And so the town moved along with implementing the licensing program and turned around and said, all right, how do we figure out what the right answer is on zoning? And given that we have the same answer as Article 42 in front of us, I think it's pretty easy to see how voters are going to feel if they turn out at town meeting. And to Matt's point, I think, the select board had a series of pretty solid discussions with some of the work group members during their meetings on this whole linking and unlinking. And frankly, it's over most people's heads. But I think the select board did a really good job. And there was a discussion, I believe, by town council who said, look, and I don't mean to paraphrase him, but what I understood him saying is delinking Article 1 and 2 makes sense because Article 2 is a tough one to pass. Not only, I'll say these are my words, not only is it hard to see the support for a full codification of unlimited full-time SDRs island-wide, it needs 2/3 majority. And so I think the select board or some of the select board members wanted to give Article 1 a better chance. And that's why they delinked it. I think that was a good approach because that's the only way that Article 1 can pass is if Article 2 fails, in my view.
Thanks, Julia. John, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick one on this. I passionately want 1 and 2 to pass, but we have 2,000 plus STRs already on the island, and no matter what, they need to be properly regulated, regardless of zoning. The ones we have need to be properly regulated, and that's what Article 1 does. And I do not think it should fail because of linking. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen, I'm scrolling through the questions and trying to find, what do you think we should ask next?
Yes, that's it's exactly what I was doing. I want to be sure people do not feel that we are ignoring their questions, but there's a fair amount of repetition in, from various people. So the next question is another one from Kathy Barrett, sent several questions in at the beginning. And so this is, let's see, expanding STR regulations. There are several, if I think it might be helpful to go to, there's several questions that are asking about, Kathy Barrett has one, is Article 2's passage dependent upon Article 1, which she says prohibits new commercially operated STRs. If it passes, if Article 2, Catherine Ward is asking, Article 2, if passed, lets things remain the same as we have now. If I'm not correct, what does it change if it is passed?
Can we answer that question, or?
Yeah, so I maybe if people want to take a stab at those two, and I'm just trying, in the meantime, I'll try and condense some of these others if possible.
I think, so Kathy's question is good because some people are, so the town on the one hand is arguing that somehow short-term rental use is a residential use. And which, I'd argue it's the planning director and the planning board and the ZBA who have decided this. That's not what the court precedents say. And that's what Act Now has been supporting, is to try to get an interpretation of our local zoning bylaw. There's a difference between not knowing not having a clear picture about what our zoning says, short-term rentals not being referenced in our zoning, and then voters going out and voting Article 2 in and actually memorializing what we know is already happening, which is some homes are being turned into full-time STRs in residential neighborhoods. There's a huge difference. And I would argue it's a massive zoning change, probably one of the biggest zoning changes that has happened since implementing zoning itself, because it affects, I had to look this up, but it affects 98% of the island. 98% of the island is in residential zoning. Even all the open space is all residential zoning. Don't ask me why, that's how it is. But that's what it would affect. And so there is a big difference between what's happening right now, which is a big question mark for some. We would argue that it would be really hard, and I think Matt kind of referred to it a little earlier, it would be really hard to see interpreting our current residential zoning that protects from commercial activity in general, allow full-time short-term rentals or fully commercial short-term rentals. That is, it goes against what residential zoning even means and protects in terms of neighborhoods. So it is a huge departure from existing zoning to pass Article 2.
Thanks, Julie. Does anybody else want to comment on that? If not, Maureen, I think what I propose we should do is move on with the agenda. We'll keep these questions. They're overlapping with what we're about to cover anyway, so we can come back to those questions and try to get to them. But let's talk about Article 1. But first, let me point out that the town developed a list of frequently asked questions and also hosted 2 information sessions via Zoom, which they recorded. And they're both available on the town's website, and they're a very useful summary for what's in Article 1, which is sort of the nuts and bolts of the changes to rental requirements, rental obligations. And we don't want to repeat what the town's already done. Today, we want to draw out differing opinions on some of the more contentious provisions. First, we'll discuss the legacy or protection provision, which is subsection 123-3H. It's the big one in the warrant article. It's the provision that exempts certain existing homeowners from the new regulations. And there's a complicating factor. The original version of Article 1 developed by and presented by the working group was almost immediately dissected by the select board, who rewrote several provisions, including that legacy provision. The finance committee then voted against two of the select board amendments, the first of which was the legacy provision. And so I'm going to start with John Kitchener. John, as we discussed, if you could just walk us through sort of sequentially the working group original proposal on the legacy provision, the select board changes, and then what the finance committee did. And then from there, you can give us your opinion on which you feel is the best and why. And you're muted. You're muted, John.
So just quickly, the legacy provision is around the number of changes of occupancy. It's about whether people can continue to operate multiple SDRs, and the question of corporations being protected. So the original work group, I'm going to have to read this, Scott, just to make sure it's right. So the original work group version offered protection to any person or other legal entity that already has an SDR certificate of registration by the date of town meeting or within 60 days of the town's establishment of a registration program. So it was pretty broad. If you'd rented before, that's really all that you needed. The select board version was more restricted. It only offered pre-existing protection to a personal legal entity that has already been operating an SDR, and there had to be proof of by the amount of taxes you'd paid. So if you hadn't actually rented, whether you had a registration or not, if you hadn't actually rented, you were not protected going forward. Whereas with the original work group one, you were. The FinCom version reverts much closer to the original work group version. In fact, it broadens it a little bit. And it says to receive pre-existing non-conforming protection, an owner or legal entity must give proof of having a certificate of occupancy by November 7th, 2023. There's no need to show any proof of SDR registration or prior renting. So it's definitely broader than the select board version. It's a little broader than the original work group version. So here I want to make clear that this is my personal opinion now, and I would say that I actually prefer the select board version, which is narrower. And why? I think it helps our overall goal of slowing SDR growth, while giving anyone that's not already rented an opportunity still to rent up to 4 times in peak season and as often as they like outside of July and August. So, I think a lot of people think of this protection as now you have something and in the future you have nothing. Well, yes, you do in the future. You can rent 4 times in July and August, and you can rent as often as you like in the other 10 months of the year. So I personally prefer the select board narrower version. of it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I see your hand, Peter, but we're going to have the question for everybody. So let's see, it was John. So Matt's next. And the question is, which provision do you prefer and why?
No, the reason I prefer the select board version, the reason why we came to that is one of the last, I attended a lot of the short-term rental work groups. In one of the last work group meetings, had a question from the public asking, you know, who would be legacied, you know, who had pre-existing, and there were like 3 different answers from 3 different members, and so it came to us, and you know, and so clearly they were trying to figure it out, and it came to us, and we at the select board level, and we said, you know, if the goal is to not take it, if the goal is to not take it away from people who have it, then let's give the thought process, let's give it to all the people that have had it and have used it. People is like John said, people will still be able to do 4 if they're new. They'll still be able to do 9 if they're, you know, owner occupied. If they're in one house, you know, they could still rent the rest of it. There's other provisions that they'll be able to rent. And so we looked at it from a, you know, from a short-term rental perspective, but also from the incentives. If the worst one, either the board, the first version from the work group or the version from the select board, both of those are okay. The version that came out of the FinCom that any CO gets it, it would be catastrophic. I think there's questions of who would track which had COs and which properties didn't, and who owned them when they had the CO and when they didn't. And there's a whole bunch of, you know, administrative issues. But then there's the issue of every single house with a CO is now can be basically, you know, it can be 9 times. It's basically no regulation. And that, you know, so there's what, 12,000 homes? We have 12,000 potential, you know, and only the new ones would be. So I think that one should absolutely not be supported. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. You're up now, Peter.
Thank you. One of the reasons that I was in favor of actually it's the planning board change, Matt, not the FinCom change. FinCom just endorsed it. In favor of having the certificate of occupancy date being the regulation is because I'll use myself as an example. I've never rented my house ever in 35 years. Okay, if I die and my daughter takes over, my daughter's an artist. She makes no money. So if she needed to use the house to generate revenue, she should have the right to do what anybody else has already done it. I've been a good guy. I haven't short-term rented. Okay, but why don't I have the right that everybody who has short-term rented and lives on the island and has a CO as of the official date, same rights as they have? That's essentially what our thought was on that.
Andy's up next. If you have anything you want to contribute to this.
Well, I don't know if this directly contributes, but you know, this is, both of these articles to me are a slap in the face to anybody that used to run a small business in a residential neighborhood. And during the early 2000s, some under their own accord moved out of residential areas because of growth. Others were forced by the zoning board to move out of residential areas. And if you continued to want to run a business out of your home, you had to take out what's called a in-home occupation permit. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this, but the in-home occupation permit it comes with a lot of restrictions. You're only allowed 1 employee, and you're only allowed 18 trips to your property per day pertaining to the business. When I look at the activity at a short-term rental next door to me, a 5-bedroom house can have 10, 12 people in it. So there's no limit to people. Whereas if I want to have a screen and window repair shop, I can only have 1 employee. The short-term rental has no limitations to how many trips go to that house, automobile trips. And that to me would include whether it's window washers, housekeepers, hedge trimmers, pool maintenance, so on and so forth. They're not limited to how many trips there are. You're giving these articles, in my opinion, are just giving a free pass and to the short-term rentals, and it's been a craze. The short-term rental, people investing in homes for short-term rentals is in a frenzy, and there nothing's keeping it in check, and it doesn't seem like they're paying their fair share either. If you're going to have a commercial activity, then you need to be paying the commercial rate tax. I'm simply just appalled, and some of this may be personal because I was involved in that sweep in 2004 of cleaning commercial activity out of residential neighborhoods, and now, you know, I'd like to rent my house year round to somebody who runs a business. We're hurting for year round housing, and I can't rent my residential home to somebody that has an in-home occupation that wants to have 2 employees instead of 1. I'm not seeing a level playing field here at all. To me, this is kind of like Turo. You can rent your car without regulations, but here in Nantucket, you know, Windmill Auto and Hertz, and they're all complaining about this. Does everybody here on this panel or out in the public, do you agree with Lyft and Uber competing with taxi cabs? I think it's not apples for oranges at all. Lyft and Uber are getting a free ride, and the taxis have to go by regulations, proper insurance, and so I'm seeing the same pattern here happening, giving just a free ride to STRs, and it's not helping the locals, and it's not helping the traditional STRs. What we're doing here is simply adding to the frenzy of more people who are going to flock to Nantucket to buy a home to rent, and they're not renting it to pay their taxes. They're posting trips to the Turks and Caicos and wherever else they're going. So there's not a level playing field here at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, you're next. The question relates to the 2 changes to Article 1.
It is hard because on the one hand, it's a hard question to answer because what Andy just said, I agree with wholeheartedly. And on the one hand, you have, you know, the planning board who came in at the 11th hour with sort of gutted what was there. And then you look at the select board version, and, you know, we think that it would have basically allowed for a status quo, and maybe nibbled at the margins if it was enforceable, which I think we all can see at this point from what's coming out of the Board of Health that they don't think it will be. The first one, so when we were on the work group, just to give people a little perspective, because I can't imagine most people watched all of our meetings. Those were pretty lengthy. We had a few meetings with the company Granicus, who used to be the software or partner, online partner for monitoring and compliance of STRs for the town. And Granicus came in and advised the work group or educated the work group on, you know, some of the tools that you could use, like, I don't know, limiting the number of STRs, limiting the number of days, you know, all these types of restrictions, and really that pertain to regulations. And I recall a conversation where Jeff from Granicus said, number of contracts is not something we can track. And when I went back to Roberto and said, you know, are you concerned about this? Because I recall this conversation, and he said, yes, I'm highly concerned, right? So now we're seeing it more concretely in the newspaper. But for anyone who thinks that Article 1 is going to prevent what Article 2 does, which is allow any home to be a full-time STR across the island, I say think again. And that's what's so difficult. If you look at them, try to look at them objectively, the select board version clearly attempts to, regulate a little more. Unfortunately, though, it was established early on by, we were against this, but most of the work group members wanted to make it sort of one set of rules for any, sort of anyone doing it, or any entity or any investor across the island. And that really poses, some difficulties in terms of regulation when that's all you're relying on. Instead, it would have been nice if we would have protected what Andy was talking about, which is year-round and seasonal residents renting their homes, not absentee ownership, investor-only STRs, corporate STRs, because both of these versions protect those commercial and those corporate STRs. And I think that's the only, when I've spoken to people in the last few years, what could everyone basically agree to? And I mean, there's not much we can all agree to in this topic. Everyone could basically agree that corporate STRs should not be. And both of these versions have that in there. So I hope I sort of answered it.
Thank you. Matt, you've been waiting patiently.
I put it up just for Peter. So I understand the position of we should be able to rent, and I've had something taken away, but it's also, I've got 3 lots on the corner of Fairgrounds and Rugged. I have 3 cottages. I have 2 dorms. I have 1 apartment. If it's CO based, they all have COs. So at some point, if this is owned by my son and my daughter and my mother-in-law or my wife, and it's a natural person, I could toss a pool in, add a couple more cottages, and have a mini hotel complex as written. And I think that is dangerous. That is not the direction we want to be heading. It would be the highest and best use. I'd probably make more money than I make baking bread doing that. But I think the island would be a lot worse off if that's, if I gave up my business to rent on the corner of Fairgrounds Road to 30, 40 people. I think the island would be way worse off. So, we have to be careful what we wish for. Part of this, of our meeting today is to try to think ahead and look ahead at what some of these things would do. And I think this is, this CO thing is something that would be very detrimental to the island. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Marina, are there any questions you want to pose at the moment?
Yes, looking for some that are, let's see. Leslie Forbes asks, please give 2 examples of why accessory uses does not work. All I heard is the consultant and counsel say it doesn't work. Please be more specific.
Be enforced. And John, talk about the 6 months. Can
I take that, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, I think that we should be able to rely on, the town council and a planning consultant. But going past that, the ambiguity that exists today is not good for anyone. And we primary use gets rid of the ambiguity. It gets rid of the lawsuits. And when you get down to, not to make this an enforcement discussion, but I don't know how you enforce it. So that's just my point of view.
Anybody else?
May I, Scott?
Oh, God.
I think that there was a lot of pushback from town council during the work group meetings, and I got a lot of hope from what Matt was able to achieve at the select board. What I've seen, though, is that, even though supposedly we weren't, the work group was being told accessory use was not the way to go by town council. Accessory use is, I can think off the top of my head, is what Brookline has, for example. Accessory use is in our zoning for the in-home occupation that you mentioned, Andy. That's something that, for example, you can have a hair salon in our zoning as an accessory use only in certain districts on Nantucket. Is it defined clearly in our zoning what that means? Can the hair salon occupy half the home? At the end of the day, the planning board and the ZBA have the ability to define accessory use, but they haven't, and it doesn't seem like they've wanted to. So, and that's sort of sad in a way, because I think it's a lot scarier to say that we would have, quote, unenforceable regulations in Article 1 that are the only defense against homes being full-time STRs across the island, than having, questions around how to enforce accessory use, but still having the defenses of the zoning itself at the end of the day. You don't remove your defenses because, you're still wondering, like, how are we going to make it all work?
Thanks, Julia. Peter.
Yeah, I've been perplexed by accessory use from the beginning. And maybe I misunderstand it, Julia, and maybe you can correct me. But I was under the impression that accessory use, if you owned a house, you had to live in it more than you rented it. And the question I've always had is, where does that person go when they're renting it?
Right.
It really only allows people that have more than one house to do that. And people that have one house, would be very difficult for them to rent, because where would they go? So I'm perplexed. Maybe you can put some light on how that would work.
I'm happy to answer Peter's question. Well, so anyone who wants to rent their home has to figure out where they're going to go, period. Right? So if you're, and Andy, if you want to jump in, go for it. But I think this is so if you live on the island year round and you want to rent your home, most people can't afford more than one home, if they can afford a home. Then you would either rent, maybe you'd rent an apartment, maybe you'd rent a basement apartment, maybe you'd rent your cottage, or maybe you'd move out for a few weeks in the summertime. The accessory use in general would mean that, yes, homes in residential areas would be used primarily as homes. But as Matt has sort of indicated, there are ways to define that a little bit more specifically for the community. And I think that's what's been missing from this whole conversation.
Just add one thing to that. If we did change to accessory use, and we've heard numbers, but I think Julia even brought up this number, the actual real estate values on the island will drop by 20 to 25%. Because the houses would not be worth nearly the same if they couldn't short-term rent.
Peter, I've never said that. So I think I know where what you're referring to, though. In homes, in communities, and it was Kauai in particular, they had pre-existing non-conforming STRs. Somebody not muted?
I don't know who that is, but
I think it's John Kitchener. So yeah, so the idea is that if, and that's, I'll go back to Peter's, to Matt's, comment. If every home on the island, if Article 2 passes and every home on the island can be a full-time STR, that is their highest and best use. So yes, we're wondering why homes, the average home these days sells for $3 million. $3 million. Who can afford that? And I think, I heard you earlier, Peter, say, well, it's working just fine. Working just fine for who? People who are renting their home for $45,000 a week? I get that part, but for everybody else who's trying to make ends meet, who's trying to, trying to live on the island, it's not working. And to say that the accessory use is sort of like not workable, I think that the idea is we have to find solutions other than what's on the table for Article 2, because there's no doubt it's going to make it harder for people to work on the island and live here.
If I may,
Please.
okay, Mr. Schaeffer, specifically to where people go, if you are only renting your primary residence, I'm really surprised you would ask that question after 35 years of being here, because I'll tell you exactly where people go when they rent their house. They move into a shed in the backyard, they live in a tent in a friend's backyard, or they live in a boat out in the harbor. And if this doesn't sound logical to you, ask around. It's the truth. That's what people have done for years. That's what the traditional rentals, STRs, which they were never called STRs, is simply summer rentals. The people moved out of their homes to make a little extra money. School teachers did this a lot. They moved out of their homes for the summer. They lived in a friend's basement. They have a boat and they live on the boat in the harbor. And I'm not stretching the truth by saying they would live in a tent in somebody's backyard. That's how desperate some locals are to make that extra money to be able to survive on Nantucket. You can't tell me that a $4 million house next door to me for $35,000 a week is struggling to survive on Nantucket and that they need to rent all summer long to afford that house. They afforded to buy the house before they even started renting. So people, it's amazing what people will do to survive on Nantucket. And they'll live in a backyard or a basement to be able to rent their house.
Thanks, Andy. Matt, your hand was up first.
Yeah, just my personal history as a kid, and Andy will laugh about this. My family we moved down to the beach. We had a shack on Jetty's Beach that ended up being moved, had water and propane, but we had a phone because my dad worked for the phone company, no electric. And so we moved to the beach. And then my mom ran the Sandy's, which was at where the Jetty's is now. And the family lived above that, with no kitchen. We used the restaurant kitchen downstairs, which was legal in those days, kind of. It's not legal now. But so people scrambled and did what they had to do. And there's a lot of people still doing that. I think the impact that it is having, my daughter just has a cottage behind Flock, but she's just had a child. It's not big enough. She's starting to look, and there's only like 20 properties, like 165 for sale. 22 are under 2.7 land or property. There are only 22 available. And so she is, she has some equity in her property. We might be able to help her out. There's nothing for her even to think about. And there is a little hope. I think the B and C locations, B and C rentals, I think the people that are renting them are sort of sitting and thinking it might be time to get out because they didn't have as good a rental as they had in the past because there've been so many added to the numbers. So I do think there's going to be some coming available over the next 5 or 10 years as some people get pushed out. But I do think it's still going to be at such a level that, I'm hard pressed to think how people are going to afford them. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. John?
Yeah, if I could, I'd just like to return to the accessory use again and say a little more about enforcement. I guess, my question to Julia is, well, how would it be proven that someone lives in a house for, X amount of time, whatever X is? How do you, could you explain how you see us really enforcing and proving that? How would we track that? I don't see that. Thank you.
I'm happy to answer John Kitchener's question. So it's a little bit similar with what we've said in the past. So just the same way that, so zoning in general, right, is something that's enforced by the ZBA and by the building commissioner. They don't necessarily go house to house and figure out what's going on. But so zoning in general, I think is a tough one to enforce, period, right? But it doesn't mean you give up your zoning. What's nice about short-term rentals, though, is that we have a licensing program in place, or that's going to be in place. I understand the town's hiring a new group or a new company to help GovOS, I think, to help with that, which is great. So when you have the property owner come in, they do have to attest, and they do. And if they're, if they're lying, or if you can tell from, I think that you will be able to figure out over time if you have complaints from the neighbors and whatnot. That's certainly one way. What I think is really disingenuous, though, is that what you're asking, John, is you're saying, we're going to give up zoning. And first of all, I'm not a zoning expert, and I'm not the planning director, and I'm not the ZBA. And I think they might have a much smarter answer than I do, because they do this for a living. But when it comes to short-term rentals, what's our best option? To remove our zoning protections and allow them across the board, full-time STRs everywhere, which is going to put these, commercial and corporate interests, give them the upper hand, and give year-round residents and seasonal residents, sort of make them second-class citizens in this whole game, and not create a level playing field, which is what Andy was mentioning. Or do we say, no, we want to protect the community. We want to protect the future of Nantucket. We want to maintain a community. And yes, of course, we want our year-round residents and our seasonal residents to rent, but there is another way. And I think to abandon ship and give these commercial and corporate and investors the upper hand is not the answer. And so I don't have a full answer there, but that's where I stand.
Okay, we'll do John and Peter, and then we'll move on. But John, go ahead.
Well, just a quick response, Scott. I wasn't being disingenuous. What I was really doing was quoting what town council and our planning consultant have said many, many times over the last 10 months, that accessory use zoning is not practical and it's not enforceable. And they are the subject matter experts, and I think we should listen to them. Thank you.
John, Article 1 is not enforceable. And the subject matter expert is the Board of Health and the health director. So, we're in a tough spot here.
I don't agree that Article 1 is not enforceable.
Right. Peter?
Yes. Article 1 will be enforceable because there will be added staff to do that work from the additional tax money that will be generated. Roberto's talking about it, how much work he could do. His staff could not handle it. If you added 2 or 3 people, they probably could easily handle it. But that's not what I wanted to say. I think we live in a bit of a dream world when we think that if we reduce the amount of rentals on the island, short-term rentals, that people that own a $4 million house next to Andy are going to rent it for $5,000 a month. They're not. They're not going to take $60,000 instead of what they could get renting it. They'll either sell it or they'll use it more. But the chances are they'll probably sell it. And it's dream world if you think that these houses are going to be available to the locals. I wish they were, but that's not going to happen.
Matt?
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with Peter that that isn't going to happen. What I would say is if we do this right, we will slow down the transition of First Way and Lewis Court and Fairgrounds and Rugged and all these other places that you would never think would have short-term rentals. That's where people are going now and doing it. And so I'm hoping that we slow down the transition of those places, those lots and those properties into this use. So looking ahead, that's my hope on this.
Thanks. Maureen, I'm going to keep going. Let's go another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll just open it up to all the questions at the end. Should Article 1 be tied to Article 2 on passage? The original working group proposal was they're a package. The select board said 1 can pass without 2, but 2 can't pass without 1. And then the Finance Committee recommended going back to the original working group provision. I'd like to know where you all stand on that, if you have anything to say about that. Starting with Andy Lowell. You're muted.
Yes, sir. All right. What kind of answer are we looking for here again? I'm sorry.
The question is, should Article 1, should Article 1 and Article 2 be passed as a package, or can they be passed separately such that Article 1 can pass without Article 2?
Maybe you ought to really start with somebody else. I think it's probably fairly obvious that I feel that both Articles 1 and 2 are not solving problems for us. So I believe every STR should be vetted individually, and we need to come up with a criteria to meet grandfathering. If you're going to grandfather an STR that's been here for 2 or 3 years, and compare that, grandfather it alongside of a 2-generation ownership. I used Taylor Cottages in Nantucket, the Corkish Cottages in Quidnet. Wonderful examples of short-term rentals that have been here for generations, and to put today's new style short-term rentals in the same boat as the old ones and just across the board give them grandfathering, not a level playing field. I don't think this is fair at all. I think a vetting process needs to be created. Maybe this vetting process can't be created in a legal fashion, and I'm just barking up the wrong tree. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen any aggressive approach to separating out whether it's corporation. Okay, you're mentioning corporation in the articles, but you've got a lot of individuals stepping in here, acting as corporations, and they may not be corporations, but they're doing the same exact thing. And what's to stop the corporations from doling out their properties to different stakeholders within their corporation and circumventing this regulation? I'm seeing so many loopholes in this that neither article is doing anything for me in a positive direction that I can see, or for the community. And so whether the two are tied together or not doesn't make any difference to me. I'll come right out and be assertive and say I'd like to see them both defeated. We need to go back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Julia, you're next.
Well, so I agree with Andy. I think what's so frustrating is that a lot of people want to see something done, and it's been a really frustrating process. Andy, you mentioned workarounds and loopholes, and throughout the work group, or in the end of the work group process anyways, when we were going through, when we had some language to look through, I pointed out obvious loopholes or workarounds or actual real legal paths to allow a corporation to continue to buy homes and turn them into full-time STRs on Nantucket, based on examples I actually could find of existing companies that were doing, were buying homes in a certain way. They could just continue to do it. And then you look at what you mentioned, Andy, which is the sort of, group of investors that act like corporations. That was sort of disregarded. And we said, what's on the table would just continue to allow that. So, at the end of the day, based on the fact that, I've sort of given up even trying to explain these regulations because they're so complicated, unfortunately. And based on the fact that they wouldn't prevent what Article 2 would allow, which is, again, change our zoning to permanently allow full-time STRs across the board, we can't support Article 1 either. I understand the idea of delinking them, and I think I mentioned that before, like just, I understand, because I don't think there's a chance in heck that Article 2 is going to pass if people show up and vote. There are a lot of, vested interests in the real estate community and others that want Article 2 to pass on its own. So voters have to show up to vote it down. But if that happens, I understand some people are frustrated and they want to see something done. I agree with Andy that, and I think our supporters agree, that we have to go back to the drawing board. This is too important.
Thank you. John Kitchener.
Yeah, on linkage, three things. I'm going to repeat something I said earlier, but regardless of the zoning law change, which I support, regulation of existing and future STRs is critically important. We have a lot already, and probably will get a few more. So regulation is critical. Past that, though, if the voters support regulation and pass Article 1, they got to be heard. They can't be heard, but then put aside if the zoning article does not pass. I hope it does, but it is 2/3 is a high bar. But I think it's wrong to let the voters be heard and hopefully pass Article 1 and then say, sorry, no, because that's just not right. I think, as today I've been speaking a little bit personally and sometimes as a representative of a group of 6 or former work group members that have stayed with this process to try to get it these articles across the line. I can tell you that 5 of our 6 former work group voting members would like to see a return to the select board recommendation of one-way linking. In other words, Article 1 can pass with or without Article 2. And that is the majority view of our group. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Peter.
John might be right. It might be the majority opinion of the group at this point. I'm not sure. I no longer belong. But the group was unanimous in passing it, or maybe one didn't vote for it. I think Julie didn't vote for it. But the original plan that was submitted by the short-term rental group did include the linkage. Let me just say this. The linkage, why I'm in favor of the linkage is I don't think it's fair to penalize people, make it more onerous to own a house if you're not telling them they're legally allowed to own the house, if that's what you believe. And I'm just saying, if you're going to have regulations on ownership, then you should have if we're not going to pass it so that they know outright that they own the house, they can do whatever they want with it, it's their property, then you can put regulations on it. But if you don't do that, putting the regulations, I think, is onerous.
Matt.
No, I support not having them linked. I think going back to the version that the select board improved, what we did is improve upon, in my opinion, we improved upon the work group and we straightened out some of the sort of misunderstandings. And so I think going back to that for both issues, both for the linkage, and not linking them, only allowing them linked one direction, I think that's a key. And I think making it, people who have rented before and not the CL. If both of those happen, then I support Article 1 wholeheartedly. I disagree with Andy and Julia that the work group did nothing. I believe that they have enough in there that will be could slow this down and could put controls in. I do have concerns about the enforcement And I think a lot of that is going to be a work in progress. A lot of that, none of us know how that's going to roll out and how many people are going to be hired and how we're going to do it. But as long as it's done with thought, and Matt and Haffenraffer, who knows the numbers better than anyone, is included in the process, as long as we do it that way, we'll stub our toes a bit, but I think we'll figure it out. And I think as long as people have to, attest under pains and penalty of perjury on some of this, I think 99% of them are going to be honest. I don't, so, now if people find a workaround that is legal, then we've got a different issue and we'll have another loophole we'll have to close. But I think 99% of the people are going to be honest. If they're signing under pains and penalty of perjury, they will do the right thing. And so I think that we've got to support, the select board version of one and move that along. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We've got about 20 minutes left and we have a slew of questions. And why don't we try to do that and tease out some of the final points. Maureen, one I wanted you to ask is from a guy named Ken. I think it's Ken Gettner.
Yeah.
And he asked, procedurally, can these articles at the special town meeting? I don't know if anybody can take that.
Can you repeat it?
Procedurally, can these articles be amended at the special town meeting?
I know Matt's pretty good at this one. I think you've asked town council a bazillion times. Every time there's a town meeting, you help us remember. But generally speaking, can only go one way.
Well, yes, but although if it's been, it comes down to the moderator, and the moderator makes the final decision. We do talk about if something is more, more or less, burdensome. Then if you can't come in and make it more burdensome if people haven't been notified. But what John Giorgio is saying in this is that since the select board edition is there and people know that there's a whole bunch of different aspects, there's going to be some leeway, I think, to making changes. And there will be a lot of confusion. There's going to be a lot of amendments. And, and sometimes when people are against something, they just amend, trying to just kill it. And so unless the short-term rental work group and the people on this call, et cetera, unless a group of us can have a meeting of the minds, I think this is going to be a pretty tough go anyway. But hopefully this is helpful and people understand what's what's in front of them.
But Matt, on Article 1, which one's going to the floor first? Is it the Finance Committee override version?
Yeah, that will go first. I would like to. I'll make a motion, or maybe some other select board member will make a motion to revert back to our version. Hopefully that will happen, and then we will go from there. But that's, but then people are free to make any motions, any amendments they want to make after that.
Thank you.
Scott, may I we talked about Article 1 for amendments to Article 1, which are sort of almost free game at this point. But our amendments to Article 2 are practically impossible. It's pretty clear what Article 2 says. So I don't know, Matt, what do you think about that?
Again, I'm not the moderator, but I think you're right. I think that it would be tough to amend it, but we'll see.
Maureen, did you have another one picked out?
Yeah, there's one from Karen Zagayko, who was a member of the STRWG, and she notes that she's talking about the guidelines or regulations to address parking limits, nuisance complaints, requiring someone designated to be available. Consequences to violation can include fines and loss of the right to rent. How do the panelists feel about these policies, and can they work in conjunction with the proposed Articles 1 and 2?
Anybody want to tackle that one? Matt?
Yeah, I'll go out quickly. I think that the idea that the only issue that we have with these articles is nuisances is kind of a false, red herring. It's not true. There's other issues. I think the loss of year-round housing and the commercialization of neighborhoods and et cetera, some of the things Andy's talked about are also part of what we're dealing with. I think any of those have to work with the, with the regulations 100%. But the difficulty is going to be who's going to do it and how are we going to staff it and everything else. That's all going to be a work in progress. Cars are an interesting thing, and this is a little bit of a side. I'll do it quick. But when people rent their houses, when they rent them, the people that are taking the house don't want the original people's car in the driveway or anywhere near it. So what happens? The select board, we had to extend the parking district past Sunset Hill, because it wasn't part of the parking district. So people were parking for weeks at a time on Sunset Hill. The same thing happened we may have to do it again this winter down at Brant Point, because a lot of the Turo cars were parking at Brant Point, and they were, people would go up and get the QR code and take the Turo car from off the street just outside of the parking district. So there are, all these weird things that, I'm kind of in the belly of the beast and see it, but you wouldn't even think about, but those happen. And where do we put them all? So as we go, we're going to have to work on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Maureen.
If I may, just on what Matt mentioned there with the parking, it creates another business. There's a lot of folks who can't leave their car in their yard when the home is rented. So can we somewhere amend a provision in here where somebody in a residential neighborhood can open up a business to park cars for short-term rentals? I mean, where does this end? I mean, if we're not going to consider renting a house commercial, then there's a lot of other businesses out there that maybe shouldn't be considered commercial as well. So I really feel, all due respect to Matt, and definitely all due respect to the short-term rental work group, I don't feel like you didn't do anything. You did a lot. You had long meetings. You hashed out a lot of details, and I greatly appreciate that. And I believe the community does it well as well. But it doesn't seem like everything was covered, and there are more details to be handled here. And to get to the amendments on town meeting floor, I believe the temperature of town meeting attendees has been, when somebody starts to propose an amendment, you hear the ohs and ahs, and amendments are kind of frowned upon these days. So I think it will end up discouraging. People come in knowing how they want to vote for the most part. So thank you for this forum, for helping people in the public to understand if they're watching it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question. Or I'm sorry, somebody else wanted to speak.
No, next question.
Okay. So Leslie Forbes says, if Article 2 will make STRs a legal primary use in any residential zone. And once that use is permitted by right, every owner retains that right, even if voters choose to change the bylaw in the future. No town can take away a codified right. And she is asking whether that would be harmful to our neighborhoods.
Go ahead, Peter.
I'm under the impression that it can be changed, that we're not locked in, and it can be changed at the next town meeting. We can go back and forth from every town meeting to town meeting, changing the rules. But so I don't think that it is an issue, but I might be wrong.
Julia?
think what Leslie's referring to is the zoning, not the regulations. I think the regulations can be changed with a simple majority at any town meeting, and there's no implication there necessarily. The zoning, however, which has to be consistent with the regulations and vice versa, that's what creates the pre-existing use, is that we've all been trying to use a different word than the G word. And that's what we're really concerned about, and is removing the zoning protection. And I think, even though I've used the term like any home anywhere on the island, can turn into an STR, full-time STR or commercial STR, it won't happen overnight. If the zoning changes, it could take a lot of years. It may never be that every house on the island is a full-time STR, but the trend that we've been seeing is really alarming. And I think, to Andy's point, there was a lot of good stuff that came out of the work group. I think the number one is data. I think First Process I keep getting their name wrong, but Matt Haffenreffer did a great job. And, he was able to verify some information, like we have roughly 2,400 STRs. Okay. We have at least 450 to 500 full-time STRs. Okay. That's, 500 full-time STRs. That's the number I think we're worried about growing. And if that number becomes 1,000, 1,500, or if people, as they are right now, are just incentivized to turn, what used to be a summer home, what used to be a year-round home, even if it stays under their ownership, when the dollars become so unbelievable, the average STR, the daily rate, the average daily rate these days in the summertime is $1,500 a night. Granted, that probably is for a four-bedroom house. That's a lot of money. And so if people keep being incentivized to create, these types of businesses, STR businesses, instead of was traditionally seen on Nantucket, then there's no doubt that Nantucket changes and becomes more of a commercial type place that continues to struggle to hire teachers, hire plumbers, get, people to live and work on the island.
Thanks. I think I saw John's hand first.
Yeah, just a quick comment about, we talk about commercial and we talk about corporate and we talk about investor only STRs. Corporate, I think we all now understand what that means, and they are the ones that absolutely are banned from this new corporate STRs are banned from this island from November the 7th. But the investor only category we don't know exactly, but it's a big one. And this goes to the investment opportunity that STRs on our island represent for people, on island or off island. But that investment opportunity is going to be significantly reduced when we pass a maximum of 4 occupancy changes in July and August, because that's where the big numbers that have been thrown around for rentals, that's when that is. That's in July and August. And going forward, you won't be able to rent for long weekends and half a week and so on. You got 4 contracts and that's it, 4 changes of occupancy. And I do think that is going to have an impact on slowing down and, in a big way, people just coming to the island to buy our homes just for short-term rental. I don't mean corporations. I mean individuals or, LLCs with a couple of individuals in them. But anyway, I think it's going to make a significant impact on the rate of growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, once someone has a right, under zoning, if it's taken away, they still have a pre-existing, they still have that, I'm on Cliff Road, I predate zoning, I'm allowed to run a sandwich shop. As long as I continue to run a sandwich shop, I can continue to do that. I think the break is 3 or 5 years. There's a certain time frame that I have to keep doing it. So the same thing would happen here. If we change zoning and allow a certain use everywhere, once we take it away, people can, if we try to as a vote, people can still continue doing it, and it would be a, pre-existing non-conforming use, and they'd be at the zoning board and they'd be, in doing it. So it is different, changing the zoning, which is why I'm worried about opening the door on zoning as wide as we're getting ready to open it. The regulations, Peter is correct, those can change more quickly, and, they'll still be litigated. There'll still be some people complaining about it, but we have a little more standing on those. If we find that, 4 in the summer isn't working, people, we're having trouble in different areas, different times a year, we can make those changes as a community a little more easily, but the zoning is tough. So that was the direct question that was asked. So I'm answering that. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. We're rapidly running out of time, so I'm just going to let everybody have 30 seconds to a minute to give us your closing argument, if you will. We'll start with John.
Okay. I am a firm believer that we need to pass both of these articles. We have to take away this neighbor against neighbor lawsuits that, was unheard of a few years ago. And it's not what Nantucket is. So I really hope that we will pass Article 2 for that reason. I think that we have a thriving SDR business already that is not going away, and it does need to be better regulated to ensure that it does not get away from us. And I'll give you the example. We talk to a lot of communities.
We're short of time.
Okay, so we need regulation to make sure we keep growth of SDRs under control. Thank you.
Julia.
I think you've heard a lot of what I said about how we feel about Article 2, regardless of how residents feel about Article 1. We really hope that you will vote no on Article 2 and not change your zoning permanently. I would encourage everyone to go read the current or the Inky's articles on dark money that has been trying to influence the short-term rental debate around town meetings. We've been always really upfront about our position and about trying to educate people, but I think there's a lot of money at stake here, and there's a reason that we're seeing, I think, a lot, influence from off island, trying to tell voters how to think and how to vote. And I hope people will turn out on November 7th.
Time, please.
Thank you. Andy, 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'd like to address one thing from Mr. Kitchener as far as narrowing down to 4 rentals for July and August. There's loopholes. And so I can't agree with that working at all. And as far as lawsuits only happening within the past few years, ask Barrett Enterprises how long they've been in a lawsuit for their neighbors trying to push their business out of a residential neighborhood. It's been going on since about 2003 when the suite began to get commercial activity out of residential neighborhoods. So I don't think we're playing on a level playing field here. Not all comparisons are being looked at, and people who want to have a legitimate business, whether it's plumbing, electrical, or something like that in a residential neighborhood, are left out of this.
Time, please.
So thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. this is a chance for people to make the decision, which is going to help the island, or let a judge make the decision to hurt the island. And it's really up to the individuals to vote yes on both of the articles, and, you know, keep the property rights that people bought when they bought their property thought they had.
Thank you. Matt, final word.
I hope people support the select board version of Article 1, and I hope people vote down our, and if they support that, they are supporting a lot of the good work the short-term rental work group did, and the improvements that the select board and town council worked out. And I hope they vote down 2 and ask us to come back. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. And with apologies to all the people who wrote with a number of really good questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to them, but I hope you found this educational. I'd like to thank our panelists, Peter Schaeffer, Andy Lowell, Julia Lindner, John Kitchener, and Matt Fee. I'd also like to thank my Civic League colleagues, Maureen Phillips, Pam Lohman, Rick Atherton, and Gail Walker, all of whom had big roles in the development of this forum. And of course, I'd like to thank our co-presidents, Peter Morrison and Charlie Stott, and our co-secretaries, Mary Walrow and Barbara Stott. And so with that, we'd like to say thank you for watching and have a good afternoon. Thank you.